everyone, and welcome to CreativePro Livestream. I'm Khara Plicanic, and I have the pleasure of coming to you today to talk about image size and resolution. So, shout out in the chat. Alexander says that there's a resolution question that are always in your training sessions. What is the question? I want to know. And Barbara says, oh, until we start today, her mind is in Paris. That's so fun. Yeah, the Olympics are going on. Lots of excitement in Paris right now. We've got some people tuning in from France, so that is very exciting. And yeah, let me know where you guys are tuning in from and what questions I can answer for you about image size and resolution. We'll be working in Photoshop today. So here's what I'm thinking we will talk about. We're going to talk about image size versus resolution because they're related but different. And we'll take a look at how you resize an image, and we'll talk a little bit about cropping and the role that that plays in resolution. And I will warn you about what I like to call death by cropping. So we'll take a look at each of those things. Make sure you drop your questions in the comments so I can make sure and answer them for you today. All right. So while I'm waiting for your comments, let's take a look here at how this all plays out in Photoshop, right? So when we are talking about image size and resolution, they are connected, but also different, and it can be very, very confusing. So first things first, when we just have an image open here in Photoshop, and if someone were to ask you, like, what size is this image? How can we even know what we are working with? So for example, I'm looking at this image on my screen right now, and nothing tells me what size it is or how many pixels it has, or if I were to hit Command or Control P and try to print it right now, how do I know what size it would even print? We can't tell just by looking at it, but we do have a few clues. So I always like to show people these. The first clue is up here in the top. If we look in the tab for this landscape image, we can see that we're currently viewing it at 18.6% of its size. So that doesn't tell us exactly what size it is, but it gives us a clue that this is a large image. This image has a lot of pixels because we can view it filled up on our screen and we're only looking at it at less than 20% of its full size. So if, for example, this image was this big on the screen and the number up here said we were viewing it at 600%, then that would be a clue that this image doesn't have a lot of pixels. So that's just kind of a way to know at a glance what you're working with. Another place to have a bit of a clue is way down here at the bottom. So by default, this little info bar at the bottom of Photoshop tells you your document size, which again, doesn't tell you exactly what you're working with, but it's a clue. So I can see that this document is 103 megs, which is really big. So again, I can tell I've got a large image here. But this is not terribly helpful. And there's actually something much more helpful that we can put down here. If we go to the little caret at the bottom and we click on the caret, whoop, there we go, then we're going to get this pop-up. And this is all the different information that we could choose to have displayed down there instead of the document size. And personally, I like to choose right here. It says document dimensions. So I'm going to turn that on. And now when we look down here, we can see 7,360 pixels by 4,912 pixels, currently 72 pixels per inch. So there we have a quick way to just know at a glance what you are dealing with. And people tend to panic a little bit when I first show them that, because they'll say, hey, this, look at all these pixels here, but oh no, my document's only 72 pixels per inch. So we're going to talk about that. But right now, just know that any image that has not been previously manipulated and sized will, what I call, spill out into Photoshop at 72 pixels per inch. So let's talk, before we dig into how this all works a little bit in Photoshop, let's talk for just a second about how resolution and image size works, right? So when we talk about resolution, we are talking about a number of pixels per inch. So that does not always matter. When we're talking about screen graphics, for example, we don't really care how many pixels per inch there are. We just care about the number of pixels total for the width and the height. So for example, if you think of an image that needs to be, like full HD size, so whatever, 1920 by 1080, that is the total number of pixels that an image would need to fill the screen on a wide format, like in a YouTube video or something. So if you were going to create a cover for an image, for a video, you would want that image to be 1920 by 1080 pixels. We don't care about pixels per inch because we're talking about an on-screen display. Another example is if you're creating an image to go on a blog and maybe your blog specs ask for an image that measures 800 pixels wide, then you make an image that measures 800 pixels wide, whatever the height needs to be, but there's no mention of pixels per inch because it doesn't matter on a screen like it matters for print. So the pixel per inch number is the resolution, and that comes into play when we're talking about how we're going to arrange all these pixels for printing. Because you may have heard that in order to get a good quality print, you're going to need between 150 and 300 pixels per inch, which is why some people kind of freak out a little bit when we are first looking over here and they're seeing this image and, oh my gosh, it's only 72 pixels per inch. And they're like, how can that be? I have a high resolution camera. Why is this happening? Well, I like to tell people that pixels sort of behave like water in a glass or in a container. So if you think about, let's say here, like I have this soda can of water, right? So this can might be filled with water and there's 12 ounces in here. 12 ounces will fill this can and give me a nice full drink. But if I take the same amount of water, let's think of that like pixels, and if I were to pour this in a bathtub, now we're taking 12 ounces of water or whatever. If I pour it into a bathtub, it's going to spread out and be very thin and not so usable in that format. Same amount of liquid, but in a nice little cup like this, it fills the can and I can drink it. But if I pour this in a bathtub, it's going to spread all out and I can't take a bath in this much water and can't drink it really when it's in a bathtub. So the idea is that the pixels in an image behave kind of like water in a can or a bathtub. And whatever size container you pour those pixels into, they're going to spread out and fill out the container. So it might be deep when it's in a small can, but when you spread it out into a bathtub, it gets very shallow. And it's the same with resolution. So every image has a set number of pixels, And you can either tell the image to print at a small size where you'll have a lot of pixels per inch, or if you try and spread out that image, let's say you want to make it a poster, then those pixels are going to have to spread out to fill out the poster, and the number of pixels per inch is going to go down. So let's pop over and see what questions I have coming in here, and then we'll take a look at this in Photoshop. So Alexander says, what is the best size and resolution to print on 2 pages of a magazine? Okay, so when you are preparing documents like for print, you're gonna have to ask the printer, because every machine, every output, and all of that is going to be different. So whether you're designing a magazine, or you're working on like a postcard or some sort of print piece in Photoshop, you always want to ask the printer what file specs and sizes they want you to give them. And then you go from there. So that's a good question. What else? All right, we'll keep those questions coming. You'll also be happy maybe to know that a lot of printers, when you reach out to them and you say, hey, I'm building this magazine or this postcard or whatever, how do I do it? They will typically have a template for you. And depending on the printer and the project, that might be an InDesign template, it might be a Photoshop template, Illustrator template, whatever. But they should definitely be able to tell you exactly what specifications that you need to build your file to in order to get the best results from their process and their machines. Okay, so let's take a look then at how we deal with this in Photoshop. So we've already peeked down here and seen that we can kind of see what's going on with our image. Now mine is showing me pixels because my rulers in Photoshop are currently set to pixels. So if I change them, if I turn them on, first of all, by pressing Command or whoop. That's not how that's supposed to go. Let's try this again. Desktop, where are you? Hold on 1 second. Interesting. I don't know what happened to my desktop. It disappeared. All right, well, let's go to this guy. So how do we now see this? We want to be able to, we're looking at, in my case right now, I'm looking at the pixels for the measurements. And I want to be seeing inches because my brain works in inches, yours might work in millimeters, and you can change it to whatever you need it to do by turning on your rulers. So I'm pressing Command or Control R, and that's going to bring up my rulers. And right now they're set to pixels. But if I right click up there, I can change them to inches. And once I do that, I'm going to come back down here. And now when I look in the bottom of my window again, we're seeing inches instead of just pixels. So that helps you understand that we are looking at a giant bathtub right now. So we might only have 72 pixels per inch for our resolution. So we've got shallow water, right? If we're thinking of 150 to 300 as like where we need to be, 72 is below that. So it's shallow water, but we've got a bathtub of pixels here. 102 inches by 68 inches. So that lets us know we've got a lot of pixels. So how do we now interact with all of this stuff? So we need to open up image size. So in Photoshop, I'm going to come up to the image menu and come down to image size. And this is going to pull up this window here where we can now interact with our pixels in our image. And if we look at this, it's showing us at the top up here, it's showing us that we've got 7,000 some pixels by 4,000 some pixels. That is the dimensions of the image. And then down below in this area here, it's showing us how those pixels are distributed, or sometimes I like to think of it as how they are shaken out. So we can see that there are 72 pixels per inch. But what if we want to print this? How large could we print this at, say, 300 pixels per inch? In order to find out, we need to make sure that we turn off this option right here for resample. So I'm going to click to disable that. And as soon as I do that, you'll notice that the width, height, and resolution are all linked now. See that link? See how it's got 3 connections to it? Not just the width and height, but also the resolution. And when those 3 things are linked, we can change any of them without losing any pixels or without creating any imaginary pixels out of thin air. So what does that look like? If I put my cursor in here for the resolution and I change this to 300, you'll notice that the width and height have changed. So now instead of 100 and some inches, this is basically poster size, 24 by 16 inches at 300 pixels per inch. So I could type anything I want in here. I could say I want 1 pixel per inch. That would give me a very large image. And I suppose you could play checkers on it if you were to print that out, because the pixels would be an inch each. So that would be pretty big. Probably won't look very photographic, but the idea is that these 3 things are connected. And when you shift one, the others shift in kind. So we could say, let's put a resolution of 200. And now we've got 36 by 24. So, that would still print great. So the point is, when these 3 things are connected, you can change anything and you're not damaging your pixels. You're just redistributing them. Okay, so let's say we want to make this 12 inches. So it's 12 by 8. So now we've got 613 pixels per inch, which is more than we could possibly use. But let's just go ahead and click OK. Nothing changes. We have simply changed the parameters of what size container the image now is. So now if I hit Command P or Control P and I try to print this, now my printer is going to be looking for a piece of paper that's 8 by 12 that it can print onto. So that's all we've done. We've changed the print size and we've kept all of those pixels. So instead of a giant bathtub with very shallow water or 72 pixels per inch, we've now poured all of those pixels into approximately an 8 by 12. And now the water's really deep, the pixels are very deep, and we have 600 pixels per inch, which is overkill for sure. Is that making sense? Let's see what questions we have. Who stole the desktop? Yeah, I don't know what happened with that, and I don't want to be trying to fix it while you guys have to suffer through that. So I don't know what's going on with that. I think I hit a keyboard shortcut and I had the wrong app spotlight and then I screwed it up. That's all right. Okay, let's go back to our side-by-side view and let's see how image size compares to cropping, right? Or resizing an image, I guess. Let's do that first. So I'm going to bring back image size. I'm using a keyboard shortcut, which on a Mac is Command Option I. On a PC, it would be Control Alt I. And that just opens up this image size dialog. So with this, if we need to downsize our image, that's when we would turn resample on, right? So this resample option, when it's off, all of these things are connected and you can safely pour your pixels into a bathtub or into a tiny little postage stamp size, whatever you need to do. But sometimes you need to throw away pixels because you need to downsize an image for the screen or the web, right? So that is when you definitely want to make sure that you enable this resample option. So with that on, you can see that now our link only links the width with the height, not with the resolution. So that means that we could come in here now and let's say we want an 800 pixel web graphic. So I'm going to choose pixels for my units here, and we've got resample turned on. So now I can put my cursor in here and say, you know what? The width needs to just be 800 pixels. Now you'll notice a few things. If we look up here at the top, it tells us that our image size, like on disk, was 1.2 megs. Or excuse me, it was 103 megs. Now it's just 1.2. So that is a clue that we have just dramatically downsized this image by throwing away a bunch of pixels, right? The resolution is still crazy high because we've unlinked it by enabling resample. So it doesn't matter. We can see that our image dimensions now are just 800 by 534 pixels. So watch what happens now when we click OK. Watch what's going to happen to the image on the screen. So I'm going to click OK. Look at that. Look how tiny it got. So we're still viewing it at 18.6% of its actual size, but instead of filling the screen at that size like it did a minute ago, now it's super tiny. Now if I want it to fill my screen, I have to zoom in on it. And now instead of viewing it at 18% to fill the screen, look at this. Now we're viewing it at 171% in order to fill the screen. All right, let me see what questions you have while I get a drink. I am recovering from COVID. Would you believe that this is the first time I've had it in all of COVID's 4.5 years? And it's hanging on. No more questions at the moment. Alexander, great example. I'll use it in my training sessions. Hey, I am here to help, so I'm glad you're finding it helpful. All right. So I hope you're seeing how the number of pixels and image size show up in Photoshop. I think it's kind of helpful to see all this stuff. So now we're looking at this dramatically downsized image. I'm going to undo the fact that we threw away all those pixels for a moment. So let me just undo that and go back to this. So now we're looking at our full high-res image once again. And yeah, we can go back into image size if we want to, see how many pixels per inch would we have if we made this only 4 inches wide. We would have 1,840 pixels per inch, which, by the way, anything over 300 is just not really helpful. So it's not like you get bonus points for having resolution pixels up the wazoo, right? So this is a huge image. We have lots of pixels. So you just basically want to keep in mind that when you need to throw away pixels or downsize for web, that's when you want to turn on resample. Otherwise, if you're just resizing this to see what you can print out of it, then you want to leave that off. Another thing that people get a little bit worried about at this point usually is they start to think, okay, so I have to manually size all my images before I can order a print, for example, like from a photo lab. If you're a photographer, maybe you are shooting portraits and now you're thinking you have to manually size everything. The answer is no, you do not. When you do your work in Lightroom or in Photoshop or whatever, you are there to just make the image however beautiful you can make it, checking contrast and vibrance and all of those types of things. And when you place an order with the lab, that's when that image is going to get sized. So you don't have to do it. You would just upload all the pixels to the lab and then you can place your order as you need to. So you don't have to worry about doing this in Photoshop unless you're downsizing something for a screen or web graphic. Or if you were going to try to print on your actual local printer, which I don't know, I can never recommend that because it's just a total nightmare. But if you love that, if that's your idea of a good time, then yeah, you would need to get in here and size it so that it can be spooled out to the printer. Otherwise, if I try to print this at its massive size, let me go back and revert to, this massive size now. So it's 100 some inches. If I try to print this in Photoshop, it's gonna, give me a warning like it can't print this because it's way too big. So that's when you would need to resize it for your own local stuff. Hopefully that is making sense. Let's go take a look in the chat. Oh, Erica's here. Erica says, coming from a print background, letting go of PPI for on-screen stuff has been the hardest, right? It's all just the way our brains get used to thinking about this stuff, which is why it's one of my favorite topics, because I remember being new to all of this and just being so frustrated. Like, I don't understand why there's like math formulas about resolution that I'm reading about in this book and I can't wrap my head around it. But really, it's just that you've got a set number of pixels. They are gonna fill out whatever size container you put them in, right? So if you think of the image size as the container, you're pouring the pixels into a little 4x6 or a 24 by 36 poster or whatever, and those pixels are gonna have to fill the space. So the more pixels you have, the deeper they can fill the space and the higher quality image you can get. That's basically how it works. Okay, so what about then the difference between sizing an image and cropping an image, right? So in the image size dialog, we can only change, the width or the height or whatever, but it's going to be proportional for most things. It would be a very rare situation where you would ever want to disconnect the relationship between the width and height. So for example, if we want this image to be 8 by 10, and I come in here and choose inches, we'll turn off resample, and I'm gonna put a width of 10, you can see that I'm only getting a height of 6. Okay, but I need an 8 by 10. So let's come in here and let's make the height 8. Well, now the width is 11. So in image size, you can change the width and the height proportionally, but you can't crop. Cropping, of course, gives us the power to change the shape of an image. So that is something different. So if I want this image to be 8 by 10, I need to use the crop tool to crop it that way. And I don't think you can talk about image size and resolution without talking about the crop tool, because they are so related. And God, this is where people end up resizing their images and really screwing it up. So I'm going to grab my crop tool here, and I want to call your attention to a couple of things. If we look up here in the control panel for the crop tool, we have a drop down. Currently mine is set to ratio, but if I click down on that, we have a number of things we can choose here. We have ratio, which we'll talk about in a minute, and width, height, and resolution. So the ratio is, of course, talking about the relationship between length and width, or width and height. And down below here, we have a number of preset ratios. So let's choose, well, I guess for our example, we can choose the 8:10 ratio, which is also 4:5. And it's defaulting to a vertical. So if I want to change that, I need to click this little switcheroo button here to flip-flop this. And now I can crop this to something with an 8:10 ratio. The difference is, let's go ahead and crop this. You'll notice we're going to have to cut off some bits on either side. That's okay. It's not because we're doing something wrong. It's because we have a long, skinny rectangle and we're cropping it into a more square rectangle. So I'm going to go ahead and crop that. And now you'll look down here and you'll see, okay, but this isn't 8:10 or 4:5 or whatever it said in the little box. It's 85 inches by 68 inches. Yes, because we didn't crop it to a specific size. We cropped it to a ratio, a 4:5 ratio, which is the same as 8:10. So that's what's happening when you choose these presets here. These are ratios. So you're getting the right shape, for example, square, maybe. We can crop this to a square. So we've got a 1-to-1 ratio, but what size is the square? It could be 4:4 inches, or it's currently 68 inches by 68 inches. So if you're trying to crop to a specific size, then you've got to come up here and instead of choosing ratio, then you want to choose width, height, and resolution. So let's do that. And I'm going to actually revert this real quick. Let's revert the file all the way back to the super high res image. There we go. All right, so now I'm going to grab my crop tool. I've got it set to width, height, and resolution. And this time, I'm going to actually punch in a number. So now we could type in, for example, 10 inches by 8 inches. Then there's this box here. And this is where Photoshop's asking you to put in the desired resolution. And I always tell people when you're new to this, just leave it blank. Actually, most of the time you can leave it blank because Photoshop will do the math and figure it out for you. And there's a little bit of a risk here that if you put a number in the box, Photoshop is like a genie that's going to grant your wish, but it's not going to tell you if you really had enough pixels to do it or if it's calling on the pixel fairy to sprinkle some make-believe pixels into your document. So let me show you what I mean. I'm going to leave this blank and let's crop this to an 8:10. So I've got 10 by 8, resolution is blank, and I'll commit the crop. And let's take a look at image size. And we'll switch over here to inches. So here we go. We have 8:10 inches, and we've got 614 pixels per inch, right? So that is what we got when we left the resolution blank. We had a lot of pixels. We've got plenty of pixels, but let's undo that now. And we'll do what I call death by cropping, which is inspired by my own mother and many of the people that I've had the pleasure of working with who needed help in this area. This is death by cropping, where instead of a full crop like this, where you're cropping, as big as you can, instead of that, death by cropping means that you are cropping in, right? Like in like that. So I'm sure no one would ever do this, but just in case you're tempted, Let's see what happens. Let's say we want to crop like this. I don't know why we would do this, but just to show you what's happening, I'm going to crop now, still 8 by 10, still leaving the resolution blank, but let's see what happens. Now when we crop, let's look down here. Now we're getting 8 by 10, but we're down to 177 pixels per inch. See how that works? So when we leave this blank, Photoshop just does the math and we end up with what we end up with. But if you're trying to do that extreme crop and you're telling it that you want 300 pixels per inch, it's going to give it to you. But what it doesn't tell you is that it just made those up. And there are ways that we can increase the resolution of an image by getting new pixels in it, making up new pixels. There are ways to do that. There's AI tools to do that. You can do that right in Photoshop and Camera Raw using the enhance feature. But I always want to know when that's happening. And so I want to be in charge of that. And I want to not have Photoshop kind of sneak it in there on the down low, which is what happens if you just type a number into the crop box when you are cropping. Does that lead to any questions? Let's see. Oh, Erica's so good. The water analogy will be helpful for sure. Erica, you're so great. Thank you for being here. I am still realizing that I'm sounding very sick and not great. So I apologize for having beverages on camera here. All right. What else? So that's a little bit about how that works. And the reason it's so important is because as designers, when we're working with all these images, we have to be thinking about how are we preparing and formatting this image for whatever layout it might be going into. Are we going to have enough resolution? And are we going to have enough, image for the piece? So for example, here is a vertical portrait. And sometimes as designers, we get asked to crop this, into a horizontal. Or as a photographer who shot portraits for many years, I would often take a portrait, something like this, and then the client would be like, oh, great, but can you make that horizontal? And it's like, well, let's grab the crop tool and we'll clear out all of these settings and we'll just keep the same ratio. So we can actually choose original ratio. And then we can flip it by clicking on this little button here. And you can see it's expanding the image. So we could maybe crop it like this, but I don't know if that really works too well. So maybe we just go ahead and crop it. We don't need generative expand. So we could crop it like this, but with AI now, we have other options. So we don't have to be limited. We could get our crop tool, keep our original ratio, we could flip it, and if we change this to generative expand, we can actually do this now, which is really amazing. So we could completely recompose this image. Let's see how this will handle it. So I've just dragged the crop where I want it to go. And from the fill option up here, I'm choosing generative expand. And then we'll go ahead and do that and let it do its thing. In real time, when I tested this, it worked great. So we'll see. Look at that. What? That blows my mind. So we have a couple different options over here. I don't know which one we think looks the best. Maybe this one. So it filled in her arms on both sides and the background here so that now we can work with this image in a layout, let's say, in a horizontal capacity. So that is something that would have been really pretty much impossible without AI previously, because we were limited by the crop. So sometimes, that comes in really handy when you're thinking about cropping an image size, especially if you're doing portraits. You might be taking group photos like this, and then you can get into trouble when people say they want an 8 by 10. And if we type in 8 by 10, you can see that in this particular crop, we would be really cutting too close. So this is another example where it's so great to be able to just pull out like this, use that generative expand command, and then when you crop it, that did not expand the sky very well, did it? There was totally a line there. Interesting. It did not generate. Interesting. It didn't do this bit, so we'd probably have to select it and fill it in. It's pretty much a solid color, so that's pretty easy. But those are cases where you really want to be able to understand the difference between aspect ratio and cropping and just resizing your image, right? What questions do we have? I think we've answered most of them for today. But yeah, so I hope that you find that helpful, right? Like, resolution doesn't have to be a big, scary, intimidating topic. Just remember you've got a certain amount of pixels in an image, and they will either spread out or come together to fill out whatever space you are trying to put them in. So whether that's a tiny little postage stamp size picture or a giant poster, your pixels are going to fill that space. And the more space they have to cover, the less pixels you'll have in every inch. And that's how it goes. So I look forward to seeing your additional questions in the comments, and I can do my best to answer them, as well as if you have recommendations or other topics that you would like to see covered, you can make sure and drop those in the comment as well. So, Jeff, awesome job. Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. All right, you guys. Well, once again, I am Khara Plicanic, and thank you so much for being here. We try to make it fun for everyone in the CreativePro community. So feel free to reach out with questions and other topics you'd like to see us cover. And until next time, happy photoshopping.